Chapter 8. "What's up, Jeremy?" AJ shouts out to his friend as he sees Jeremy enter through the doorway of room 245 of Nordham High School. Jeremy waves back at his friend as he walks over across the classroom to his seat near the window on the far side of the room. It's the first class of the day, and the sun is pounding in the window, scorching the retina at the rear of his eyes. His eyes squint tightly, and he raises his hand above his brows to shade his face from the painful shine. AJ is leaning back really far in his chair, which sits directly next to Jeremy's at the back of the classroom. Balancing on his hind legs, he keeps himself up by holding the desk in front of him with his left foot. Rocking back and forth, he begins talking to Jeremy while staring at the girls around the room. Jeremy can hear him speaking, but cannot make out the words because his concentration is elsewhere, far away. Staring at the large windows to his left, he just cannot shake the dreams that have been haunting him recently. It's been a week since he had been back in school, but he hasn't really been able to focus, with the previous night being the second time he had had a strange dream. And his inability to return to sleep, his mind has long since checked out for the day. Not a good sign when it is not even noon quite yet. Jeremy's eyes roll around the room, glazed over and unable to focus on anything. A yawn creeps up out of his mouth, and he blinks wildly for a moment, lashes flapping at hummingbird speeds. Back in focus, his concentration finally clicks into the previously one-sided conversation as AJ wraps up the party that had taken place the Friday before. "You really should have come, Jerm. Aaron was definitely missing you." He winks and starts to chuckle. Placing his hands leisurely behind his head, interlacing his fingers, he begins to say something. However, he suddenly loses his balance, and failing to catch himself on the desk, he slams harshly backwards to the floor, with legs hanging high above himself. The buzzing around the room halts as everyone turns to stare at AJ lying, cringing on the cold, hard floor. "You alright?" Jeremy asks, with a half smile, the closest he had come to a real smile in such a long time. He, along with everybody else, stares at AJ laying on the floor, but nobody even pretends to offer to help him up. "Ow, that hurt," AJ says as he returns to his feet and picks up his chair. "That's right, everyone. I am A-OK. Thank you all for your concern." He almost shouts with a tone filled with snark to people standing and sitting around the classroom, talking amongst themselves and still laughing at his misfortune. "You sure you're okay?" Jeremy asks. "No, everything's fine," he shouts out to the class again. "Help is unnecessary, but thanks for offering, everyone." Placing his chair back in its proper position, he returns to sitting in it, this time with all four legs planted firmly on the floor, because he doesn't seem to care for a repeat performance. "Hello, ladies," he says with a smile to two pretty girls sitting in front of him, giggling at his expense. They turn to each other, smile, and begin talking amongst themselves again, in a way that AJ cannot hear them. As AJ leans over his desk and begins to talk to the girls, Jeremy notices a boy at the other end of the classroom. He has blonde hair and watches closely as Mr. Sampson enters the room and walks toward the front of the class. Jeremy did not know this boy personally, but knew his name was Richard. He also has always found the boy's intensity toward Mr. Sampson rather odd. The boy just eerily leers at Mr. Sampson as he places his bag on the floor next to the big brown desk at the front of the classroom and takes out a few books and folders. Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm a little late," Mr. Sampson calls out from the front of the classroom, just before planting himself in his black leather chair. The math teacher grabs the blue attendance book from the pile of books removed from the bag and begins to mark off those present and those absent. Looks like we only have 2 absences. Anybody know where the Cannon brothers are today?" He looks around waiting for a response, but receives no answers. After getting a few shrugs and shaken heads, he nods a couple of times and continues on, finishing up his attendance. I guess those two are the only ones who won't be gracing us with their presence today, he says with a playful smirk on his face, and he stands and walks toward the blackboard. After picking up a large white piece of chalk from the steel rack below, he begins to draw some triangles on the board. Now everyone, it's time to continue our work with the subject you all seem to be so fond of. He smiles a toothy grin at the class. Trigonometry! He shouts with faux enthusiasm, throwing his arms in the air and waving them wildly about. A whispering roar comes from his mouth as he fakes an audience excitement, such as those heard in sporting events. This is answered back with the combined pained groans of almost the entire class. I know, he continues, his face scrunching and mockingly pouty face. Not really all that fun to learn, he says as he tosses the chalk from one hand to the other in an arc over his head and places it back to the board. A squeal screeches across the room as he goes on drawing a partial circle in one corner of the triangle. It is, however, He turns his head to see a hand in the air in the last row. A small, calm smile appears on his face, dispersing the pout he had been wearing. Yes, Jeremy, he calls out. He seems excited to see Jeremy participating in class, and he can't wait to hear from him. Having always been quite fond of Jeremy, he has really missed the student's presence in class. The blond boy Richard seemed displeased by Mr. Sampson's reaction to Jeremy, glaring at Jeremy in envy. He's making Jeremy feel very uncomfortable. About Wilt and Tyler? Jeremy begins. That might be why they aren't here, Jeremy says, pointing out the window next to him. Everyone turns their head toward the window, at which Jeremy is still pointing. Suddenly, everyone stampedes towards the window to see 3 police cars and 2 unidentifiable black cars in front of the Cannon House, 2 blocks away from the rear parking lot of the school. Everyone glares at Mr. Sampson, who for the first time in his career is at a loss for words. Mr. Sampson excuses himself and exits the classroom nervously and in a hurry. About 20 minutes pass before he returns, and nobody in class has said a word aloud since his departure, just whispers within small groups. Jeremy for once sits in complete silence, watching uniformed officers and suited men alike entering and leaving the Cannon House. When Mr. Sampson returns, he says not one word. With a sullen look on his face, he continues on with the lesson. The only thing heard the rest of the period is the sound of chalk scratching against the blackboard, pencils scribbling against the paper of the students' notebooks, and Mr. Sampson's words on the subject at hand, but only when necessary. It is incredibly odd for Mr. Sampson to not make jokes and quips as he teaches. This makes the rest of the class sit in unease. None of the students talk, but everyone's mind is racing over the idea of what could be going on. At the end of the class, multiple students go up to Mr. Sampson to find out what is happening at the house of the Cannon brothers. But all he tells them is nothing, and then he sends them on their way. Jeremy and AJ are the last 2 to leave the class and stop by Mr. Sampson's desk. His eyes are red, and he's trying very hard to keep his composure. Is there anything I could do to help you guys? He asked the 2 boys with a forced smile. Is everything okay? Jeremy asks, swinging his book bag up and over his shoulder. Mr. Sampson doesn't answer. He just shakes his head. He takes a deep breath and interlocks his fingers in a single fist at his lips. Look, guys, he begins. I can't really discuss what's going on with you yet. Bull, AJ shouts out. Why won't you tell us? He demands angrily. As students here and their friends, we deserve to know what's... He stopped abruptly by Jeremy putting up the back of his hand in front of AJ's face. AJ really looks at Mr. Sampson's face and notices the tears pooling in his eyes. You guys should probably get going to your next class. They are planning on making an announcement tomorrow. Mr. Sampson says, shooing them away with one hand while keeping his face at an angle away from their eyes. AJ goes to speak, but is stopped short by Jeremy once again, who in turn nods towards the door, and they begin on their way. As AJ leaves the room, Jeremy hears Mr. Sampson call out to him from behind. Jeremy. He looks at Jeremy from across the room. If you are truly a friend of the Cannons, they are going to need that right now. He finishes as a single tear falls down the left side of his face. Jeremy backs out of the door, letting it close in front of him. The last thing he sees in the classroom is Mr. Sampson lowering his head to his desk. Jeremy looks worriedly at AJ as they begin to make their way down the hall. They hear the locker shut behind them and turn to see Richard staring down the hall toward them. All of them are stuck and pause for a moment before AJ begins to walk away, tugging on Jeremy's shoulder to follow. Damn, AJ begins. That kid creeps me the hell out so bad, he says to Jeremy's nodding in agreement. They continue on to the corner, turning around it and disappearing out of Richard's eye line. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the story and how it's going, please subscribe so you can get every chapter as it comes through. Discuss in the comments, plot threads, and where you think the story's going. Share with anybody you think might find it interesting. Until then, I'll see you next video.